Good evening and welcome to the Bold African Voice BAV Network. I'm Amy Callan.
And I'm Malik Johnson. Tonight we bring you a deeply troubling story from our West African region, one that demands urgent attention, rigorous analysis, and yes, a little levity to keep our minds grounded.
Indeed, Malik. Our focus, the recent indictment in Liberia of 5 women accused of trafficking their own children and relatives' children to Mali and Burkina Faso. The case throws into sharp relief the broader scourge of human trafficking across Africa and offers a cautionary tale for governments, regional bodies, and civil society alike.
Buckle up, folks. We will dive into the facts, unpack the drivers, compare region-wide trends, and peer into what the future may hold. Plus a little humor, because otherwise we'd cry.
So, let's dive into this disturbing case from Liberia, where, 5 women have been indicted for trafficking their own children and relatives' children across borders to Mali and Burkina Faso.
Indeed. Right. It's shocking. 14 children, ranging from just 11 months old up to 8 years old, being moved under these tragic circumstances.
Exactly. And get this. 3 of the women reportedly trafficked their own biological children. It, really subverts every idea we have about family bonds.
Yeah, that's disturbing. Absolutely. And what's even more troubling is how these cases are connected to, well, funding gaps and weak legal enforcement systems in Liberia.
Right. The indictment came just after Liberia got slapped on the Tier 2 watch list again in the U.S. State Department's Trafficking in Persons report.
I see. And speaking of funding, it's astonishing that the anti-trafficking budget plummeted from something like $230,000 in 2023 to only about $40,000 in 2024-2025.
Exactly. It's like they're trying to fight a raging forest fire with a squirt bottle. That kind of budget cut really cripples victim services and prosecution efforts.
Right. That's a major weakness. And then there's the method itself. Falsified birth records and altered names to confuse immigration officers. It's, almost as if the traffickers built a system to bypass the very safeguards meant to protect these children.
Yeah, absolutely. They even used funds from a resettlement program managed by the Ministry of Gender, Children, and Social Protection, which is a bitter twist.
That's really ironic. And let's not forget how these mothers and female relatives exploited the promise of education or a better life, only to end up, well, exploited in a network of forced labor and misery.
Precisely. Poverty and inequality are at the core, pushing families so far into desperation that they end up making decisions that blur even basic notions of care and protection.
Yeah, it's like being stuck between a rock and a hard place. Exactly. When poverty is rampant, the promise of a better life can be a dangerous lure. It's like, they might feel like they have no other option at all.
I agree, but here's something I've been mulling over. While poverty is a common driver, wouldn't you say that there's also a significant cultural component? Families sometimes hide these cases as internal matters, which only exacerbates the problem.
That social silence is dangerous. True, and that brings us to the notion that traffickers often exploit the community's reluctance to intervene. When everyone sees it as a family issue, the problem festers.
Exactly. And the system's response, or the lack thereof, makes it even worse. In Liberia, the courts have historically, not held traffickers accountable. In fact, the government didn't convict any traffickers for, consecutive years.
Right, that sets a worrisome precedent. You know, there's an interesting, albeit grim, comparison with other African states. While Liberia struggles with familial or internal trafficking, other countries like Mali and Burkina Faso deal with forced labor, sex trafficking, and even conflict zone exploitation.
Yeah, and that indicates that the problem is both regional and locally nuanced. Liberia's case is sort of like the tip of a very dark iceberg.
Absolutely. It reminds me in a strange way of a bad zombie movie, one where the contagion isn't about the undead, but about the slow decay of institutional trust and resources.
Laughs. Right, and the stakes are much higher here. Real lives are at risk. And to add to that, there's a critical need for stronger regional coordination. If ECOWAS and neighboring states like Mali and Burkina Faso could, get their act together, maybe the slippery trafficking networks could be disrupted.
Coordinated efforts are key. And speaking of coordination, some recent attempts at joint task forces have been pretty underwhelming. For instance, Nigeria and Niger are making moves, but countries like Liberia remain isolated in these efforts.
Right, and that isolation not only affects legal outcomes but also hampers victim support and community awareness programs. There hasn't been a sustained, serious push for public outreach.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I have a point to challenge. Some might argue that these indictments, despite the low budget, at least signal some legal momentum. But I'd say, isn't that just a drop in the ocean compared to the overall systemic failures?
That's a fair point. The indictments do provide a glimpse of accountability, but without proper victim protection and systemic funding, the legal momentum might, well, fizzle out pretty quickly.
I totally see that. And then there's the challenge of regional porous borders that these traffickers exploit. It's not just a domestic issue. It's a cross-border nightmare fueled by weak coordination and digital deception.
Right. Digital deception is a whole new frontier. With smartphones everywhere and traffickers using WhatsApp and Facebook groups, the methods have evolved.
Technology can be a real double-edged sword. Exactly. Now, taking a moment, humor aside, this is where a homegrown approach becomes crucial. Relying solely on international donors isn't going to solve the problem in the long run.
Agreed. There's this idea circulating that Liberia needs to fundamentally revamp its anti-trafficking model, moving from, sporadic donor-funded projects to, robust domestic funding and community-driven initiatives.
That would be transformative. And on that note, the role of public awareness can't be overstated. There's a huge need to change cultural narratives, where the "it's my child" defense gets exposed for what it is.
Exactly. It calls for brave community outreach, which includes real testimonies and local language programs, not just radio jingles that barely scratch the surface.
Absolutely. And then there's the matter of witness protection. Without credible measures, survivors go silent and justice isn't served.
Right. In many cases, survivors either endorse waivers or simply vanish from the process, which totally undercuts any legal case.
That's a glaring issue. Plus, if these trials fail to convict, it sends a message that traffickers might get away with these crimes, and that alone can further erode trust in the government.
Precisely. And let's talk about the implications on the international stage. For instance, being stuck on the Tier 2 watch list for consecutive years isn't just a shame. It can lead to major funding cuts and diplomatic isolation.
Indeed, it has ripple effects. When global partners see that, they might pull back even more. In fact, the U.S. already reduced anti-trafficking funding drastically, which further cripples local efforts.
Exactly, and it becomes a vicious cycle where reduced funding leads to weak enforcement, which then just fuels more trafficking dynamics.
A self-fulfilling prophecy of neglect. So, moving forward, what must happen? Increased funding? Robust victim support measures, genuine community outreach, and stronger regional collaboration need to be top priorities, right?
Absolutely. And let's not forget technical measures, digital monitoring, and real-time data sharing that could help track these movements across borders.
Yes, that modern approach really makes a difference. The fight against trafficking in this case isn't just about legal processes. It's about restoring dignity to these children, ensuring they receive the necessary care and reintegration into society.
Right. These 14 children represent more than just statistics. They're potential teachers, doctors, or innovators whose futures have been threatened by, greed and negligence.
And protecting them is a moral imperative. And at a broader level, it's a wake-up call for every nation in the region to invest in socially responsible policies that tackle not just trafficking, but the root causes like poverty and inequality.
Exactly. It's like, the system needs to be overhauled, from funding allocations to community education to technological oversight and robust law enforcement.
That's the comprehensive approach needed. There's a tough road ahead. But if the regional bodies like ECOWAS actually step up and work on harmonizing legal frameworks and border controls, There's hope that these cycles of exploitation can finally be broken.
Yes, and just imagine a future where Liberia and its neighbors not only catch up with enforcing their laws, but also foster environments where families are supported instead of pushed into tragic decisions.
Absolutely, that vision is necessary. Ultimately, while the indictments in this case do show some legal momentum, the real test is whether reforms follow. And if they don't, we're looking at a continuation of these grim patterns, one step forward and several steps back.
Right. It's a stark reminder. When vulnerable populations are left unsupported, even those closest to them might end up contributing to their own tragedy. And that's a crisis we can't afford to ignore.
Indeed.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's jump right into the heart of the matter. We're talking about Liberia's disturbing case where mothers are, trafficking their own children. It's a stark reminder of the fragility of justice systems in contexts of deep socioeconomic strain.
Absolutely. And what really stands out is the trial of those 5 indicted women. It's not just a legal case, it's like a test of Liberia's judicial resolve and transparency.
Right. And here's the kicker. The women admitted their involvement, but due process still has to be maintained. We're looking at transparent proceedings, proper legal counsel, and ensuring that the minors, these vulnerable children, are protected.
Yep. And what about the state of the judiciary itself? Liberia's system, though constitutionally independent, seems perpetually under-resourced and, frankly, sometimes swayed by politics.
Exactly. Judges are few, dockets are overloaded, and case backlogs sometimes last longer than a presidential term. It's like, you're trying to catch a runaway train with a paper bag.
That's a vivid analogy. It's also concerning how justice delayed often evolves into justice denied. Cases vanish when witnesses disappear or when evidence mysteriously disappears from police files.
Oh, totally. And the irony is, while justice is meant to protect the powerless, failure here only reinforces the notion that the system bends to favor the powerful. It's like, if your case isn't backed by international funding, you might as well be invisible.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of international influence, what about the role of the media in all of this? Investigative journalists in Liberia shine a light on these issues despite facing, significant challenges.
Exactly. Liberian journalists are, basically the watchdogs of this crisis. Despite intimidation, chronic underfunding, and limited access to state data, they've managed to expose these trafficking stories time and again. It's like they're working on a shoestring budget, sometimes literally running their stations on generators that sound like they're coughing up secrets.
That's both incredible and tragic. When investigative journalism operates under such constraints, it reminds us that a free press is the oxygen of justice. Without it, the cases fade into oblivion.
And that's where transparency becomes crucial. Civil society, NGOs, and international partners need to push relentlessly for accountability. Without sustained public pressure, the case risks becoming another forgotten headline, a dark reminder that Liberia might just move on without real consequence.
Right, exactly. Let's talk about those NGOs for a moment. There are groups like World Hope International, Don Bosco Homes, and Defense for Children International Liberia that are working tirelessly to rescue and rehabilitate these children. But they're often stretched to the breaking point.
Yeah, and they're battling not only the physical rescue, but also the aftermath, like providing counseling and rehabilitation. I mean, one social worker mentioned to Front Page Africa, "We are saving children with empty stomachs." That's a heart-wrenching image.
It's a clear signal that heroism alone isn't enough. Without sustained funding and institutional support, even the most dedicated NGOs will eventually crumble under the weight of overwhelming need.
And here's where I might, respectfully challenge one point. Some might argue that these NGOs are simply failing the system by not being self-sustaining. But really, the blame isn't on them. It's on donors and policymakers who keep shifting from medium-term projects to emergency responses.
Exactly, I agree. Precisely. We need to transition from short-term fixes to long-term institutions. Persistent funding, rather than one-off projects, would empower these heroic groups to truly transform lives.
Absolutely. And while NGOs and the media try to hold the system accountable, there's another challenge, the open border dilemma under the ECOWAS Free Mobility Protocol.
Yeah,
It's like, on one hand, you promote trade and economic integration, but on the other hand, you create, loopholes for traffickers.
right. If border controls lack proper safeguards, traffickers can easily move children across countries like Liberia, Guinea, and Mali. It's a profound policy contradiction.
And the solution isn't to close the borders, but to upgrade the entire system. For example, immigration officers could be trained in child protection detection, and tech could be used to create digital records that flag suspicious movements.
I like that thought, using technology to bolster human rights. Imagine a system where a child's digital ID triggers an alert when an adult different from their guardian tries to cross a border with them. That could really tip the scales.
Totally. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about the underlying economic vulnerabilities at play here. Most of these trafficking cases are rooted in profound poverty. Families living on less than $2 a day are desperate.
Yeah, miserable conditions. Economic empowerment really becomes a key factor then. Small community livelihood grants or microcredit initiatives, similar to the village savings and loans associations you see in Sierra Leone, can effectively reduce the vulnerability of families to trafficking.
Exactly. And, this isn't just about money, it's about dignity. Coupling financial support with vocational training for single mothers can provide a sustainable path out of desperation. It's empowerment over enforcement.
Definitely. And that idea resonates deeply. As much as law enforcement plays a role, you can't arrest your way out of poverty. The ultimate strategy against trafficking must be anti-poverty measures.
Right. And it dovetails perfectly into the broader narrative of rebuilding and healing. Once these children are rescued, rehabilitation becomes the next massive challenge. Safe homes need to be sanctuaries, not just temporary shelters.
Absolutely, yes. Rehabilitation efforts should include trauma-informed care and, long-term counseling. These children face psychological scars that, if untreated, can haunt them for life.
And some nations are already pairing recovered victims with supportive mentors for ongoing care. Liberia could adapt such models effectively, ensuring that these kids not only survive, but truly thrive.
Yep, totally agree. It's imperative to remember that healing isn't instantaneous either, and it requires a holistic approach. Education, community reintegration, and consistent psychological support are all part of the bigger picture.
And as we look further ahead, the trial at hand could reshape global perceptions of Africa's fight against trafficking. If handled well, it could, set a benchmark for the region and influence major reports like the U.S. Trafficking in Persons report.
Indeed. But if it goes badly, it might just confirm the cynicism that the systems in place only serve the elite.
Exactly. So, in essence, Liberia's case is at the crossroads of justice, media freedom, NGO sustainability, and economic vulnerability. Each of these areas interlocks to form the broader struggle against child
Absolutely.
trafficking.
And while it's a deeply grim picture, it's not without hope. Grassroots initiatives, if supported properly, can catalyze real change. Sometimes from the most unexpected sources like community leaders or local religious figures.
Yep, and many local figures hold a moral authority that can be a game changer. Faith institutions, when they step up to educate and advocate with conviction, can help shift community norms. It's like, you don't need a UN convoy, you just need a
that's
powerful
true.
sermon, you know?
Yet, one must consider that sometimes these institutions remain silent due to fear or tradition. It's a delicate balance.
True, and while some are speaking out, like the Interfaith Council in Ghana with their No Child for Sale campaign, others are still caught in cultural or political pressures. It's a mixed bag that requires persistent advocacy and, robust support from regional bodies like
Definitely,
ECOWAS
right.
and the African Union.
At the end of the day, the healing and protection of Liberia's children, and by extension Africa's, depends on a coordinated approach. one that marries justice with economic opportunity, robust media scrutiny with strong institutional backing, and local leadership with international support.
Exactly, and it also calls for a reimagining of how we approach vulnerable communities, from better border control integrated with human rights to comprehensive economic interventions. Every angle needs to be addressed.
Absolutely right. And the global community needs to watch closely. This trial and the unfolding narrative in Liberia are more than just isolated incidents. They're a reflection of systemic challenges and the urgent need for change.
Right on. With the stakes as high as they are, every broken promise becomes a rallying cry for more accountability and, real sustained action.
Yeah, totally. So as we continue to follow this case, it's critical to keep in mind that the fight against trafficking is an ongoing battle, one that involves policy, community, and yes, each one of us advocating for justice.
For sure. And while today we've unpacked many layers, from the shortcomings of the judiciary to the heroic yet strained efforts of NGOs, the conversation isn't over. It will be interesting to see how this trial influences the broader fight against human trafficking across Africa and
Indeed.
globally.
And that's a wrap for now. Stay tuned as this conversation deepens and continues to challenge the status quo and push for a future where every child's rights are fiercely protected.
Thanks for joining in, everyone. Keep questioning, keep pushing, and let's hope for a fair and transformative outcome that elevates justice across the board. Welcome back to our deep dive. Today we're exploring a case that's both shocking and, a wake-up call. Liberia's disturbing scandal of mothers trafficking their own children.
Absolutely. And it's a case that really forces us to confront the brutal reality of how domestic failures can go international, right?
Exactly. It's like, imagine your country's reputation being, torn apart because one scandal spills over. Liberia's appearance on the U.S. State Department's Tier 2 watch list for 2 consecutive times is not just red tape. It's a glaring sign that international donors are pulling their eyebrows up.
Right. And that label, it's almost like being on academic probation. One more misstep and bam, funding cuts and credibility lost.
Yeah, it really puts pressure on Liberia. They managed to get off watch with a meager $230,000 allocation back in 2023, but then one fiscal cut and that high-profile scandal unraveled things fast.
And when you compare that to countries like Ghana and Nigeria, where Ghana actually moved up by improving convictions and Nigeria rolled out digital systems, Liberia's regression feels even more acute, doesn't it?
Definitely. It really underscores a deeper issue. When anti-trafficking measures are more about symbolism than real systemic reform, any slip-up immediately undoes any small progress achieved.
Right. That makes me wonder, though, isn't it a bit harsh to say that previous success might have been just, well, donor-driven compliance rather than deep reform?
Well, it's a fair point, but consider this. If the only measure of progress is ticking boxes when the international spotlight is on you, then when the lights go off, nothing really changes. It's like performance acting in public. Once the camera's off, the reality sets in.
I see what you mean. It suggests that systemic issues need genuine political will, not just policy updates.
Absolutely. And speaking of political will, Liberia's anti-trafficking efforts have been under close scrutiny. Their budget, for instance, slashed by 80% by 2025, speaks volumes. It's like saying, we'll act against trafficking if we have the money to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And that financial cut has cascading effects. It impacts everything from victim rehabilitation to coordinated law enforcement.
Right. It shows that the issue of trafficking isn't just about individual crimes. It's a symptom of larger governance and structural problems. When oversight is lacking, even neighboring countries jump on the bandwagon of skepticism.
Speaking of neighbors, the TIP report rankings paint an interesting continental picture. South Africa maintaining Tier 1, Kenya and Ghana in Tier 2, while Liberia, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, and Sierra Leone sit on the watch list, and even Eritrea and Equatorial Guinea falling to Tier 3.
Yeah, it really highlights how countries that adopt community policing and robust victim services tend to make rapid progress. Liberia's reliance on ad hoc measures almost seems like a throwback to outdated reactive governance.
And it raises the issue of donor diplomacy. African leaders often decry using US or European benchmarks, calling it neo-conditionality, like modern aid colonialism. But at the same time, these approvals and funds are crucial.
Exactly. It's a delicate dance. On one hand, you have the international pressure to reform. On the other, an inherent need for sovereignty and locally tailored solutions. There's this fascinating idea floating around, a national trafficking scorecard, made in Africa,
Right.
measured by Africa.
That concept is intriguing. It could reframe the narrative by emphasizing local responsibility while still holding governments accountable, rather than souring donor relationships further.
Precisely. And then there's the role of the African Union. Their Ouagadougou Action Plan has been around since 2006, yet it feels more symbolic than actionable. They say a lot, but often, nothing concrete seems to come out of it between conferences.
True. Perhaps linking performance directly to, say, AU funding could turn those declarations into verifiable results.
Totally. It's like tying incentives to actual deliverables, not just moral appeals, but financial ones, because money, as we all know, speaks loud.
Absolutely. Now, zooming out, we can't ignore the root causes: economic despair and youth unemployment. Over 200 million young people in Africa are unemployed or underemployed. And Liberia's youth unemployment rate, believe it or not, hovers around 65%.
Yeah, it's like, when opportunities dry up, trafficking becomes a perverse shortcut to survival. Traffickers promise foreign jobs, often turning desperate hopes into loaded traps.
Right. And that's compounded by the so-called migration mirage, where the idea of going abroad is glamorized, even if that foreign land is nothing more than another form of exploitation.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle where even a hint of opportunity is enough to coax families into dangerous decisions. And the catch is, many of these decisions hinge on, the lack of basic education.
Education really is the missing vaccine here, isn't it? Literacy below 30% in some regions is not just a statistic, it's a door left wide open for manipulation.
Yeah, and if young people can't read or critically assess promises, traffickers get away with forging papers and selling false dreams. Literacy isn't just an academic achievement, it's a shield against exploitation.
And maybe, along with education, a cultural reboot is necessary. In some communities, sending a child to live with a relative is normal, so traffickers twist that tradition into commerce.
Exactly. The cultural element is a double-edged sword. Traditional practices can offer social support, but they can also be exploited when economic pressures are so high. It's like a cultural reboot is needed, a recalibration of what we consider normal and safe for children.
Right. And technology might offer us a modern tool in this fight. I mean, take Nigeria's NAPTIPI app or Ghana's WhatsApp hotlines for reporting trafficking. Those are practical steps that show how digital solutions can empower communities.
Absolutely. Imagine if Liberia, with its budget constraints, could implement a simple, low-bandwidth reporting system integrated into border control. It's practical, it's scalable, and it could be a game-changer in flagging suspicious movements in real time.
Yeah, that makes sense. But here's a thought. Don't you think relying solely on technology might risk overlooking the human element? I mean, without the political will to enforce these tools, they could just remain shiny gadgets.
I see your point. Tech is only as effective as the commitment behind it. The real challenge is converting political rhetoric into tangible actions.
Exactly. Now, bringing this back to Liberia's political landscape, President Boakai is under intense pressure. He inherited a sluggish system and now faces accusations of performative governance, where actions speak louder than empty promises, right?
Yes, and his measures, like the Third National Action Plan on Human Trafficking and Interministerial Coordination, while promising in theory, lack the cash and robust implementation to really make a dent.
It becomes a vicious cycle. Media scrutiny, donor skepticism, and political infighting feeding off each other, which then spills over into regional consequences.
Exactly. In border towns like Ganta or Bow Waterside, the reality is harsh. Children are often out there, invisible and unprotected, the human cost of a failed system that doesn't tackle the root causes of trafficking.
Absolutely. And that's why ECOWAS and even the AU must step up, not with just declarations, but with combined patrols, shared intelligence. If regional cooperation on maritime piracy can work, why not on terrestrial trafficking?
Right. It's a call for a united front. Imagine an African anti-trafficking innovation hub, maybe even a West Africa trafficking index, which would enable local governments to measure progress in a way that fits their context.
Yeah, that could turn a scandal into a model for reform. When you put it all together, smart investments in education, technology, community engagement, and genuine political will, it's not just about curbing trafficking. It's about nation building. Protecting children is a foundation for a healthier, more secure future.
Exactly. This deep crisis, as tragic as it is, can be the catalytic moment for Liberia to reimagine its future. No more excuses, no more performative measures. It's time for actions that truly protect children and restore credibility both domestically and on the global stage.
Right on. And with that, we're left with a compelling call to action, one that goes beyond the limits of international reports and into the heart of community reform. It's a challenging road ahead, but one we must navigate if we're to come out stronger.
Absolutely. The journey ahead is as much about transforming a nation's identity as it is about addressing economic and social disparities. And, that's a conversation we'll have to continue in our next segment. Connecting the dots between domestic reform and support from the African diaspora.
Yeah, can't wait for that discussion. Stay tuned, folks. The conversation isn't over yet. We're just getting started on this complex and critical subject.
Welcome back to the show. We're diving into the heavy issues raised by Liberia's disturbing case where mothers are involved in trafficking their own children. It's a story that not only shakes the nation, but also reflects the wider challenge of human trafficking on a continent.
Absolutely. It's really hard to digest, but also crucial to talk about. What strikes you the most about what's been discussed?
Well, what jumps out is that this isn't just a local issue. It really ties into the responsibilities of the African diaspora and global communities. I mean, think about it. Africans abroad send home over $100 billion in remittances every year, yet so little of that money is channeled into long-term solutions like child protection. It's like having a huge toolbox
Right.
and using just a tiny hammer.
Yeah, exactly. And the idea that even 1% of those remittances could vastly improve anti-trafficking programs. It's both inspiring and infuriating at the same time. Because why isn't it happening already?
Totally. It's like, these funds have the potential to triple the current anti-trafficking budget in Liberia sustainably. But then there's also the power of the diaspora beyond just the money. Those living abroad can use their platforms to advocate and educate just as they did during the Ebola crisis. That shows there's a real opportunity here to reshape the narrative.
And it goes deeper. They aren't just donors, right? They're also moral influencers who can pressure home governments to act, so that the fight against trafficking truly becomes a transnational responsibility.
Exactly. It's all intertwined. And speaking of intertwined issues, another critical point is about partnerships and donor dependency. Too often, we see Western agencies fund programs that, once their money is gone, crumble like a poorly made cake. It's unsustainable and it leaves local communities in a bind.
It reminds me of that analogy, like building a house on quicksand. Support that isn't rooted in local ownership just falls apart when it rains.
Yes, you hit it right on the head. The solution should be co-ownership models where the leadership remains local, and foreign donors are simply capacity builders, not the commanders. That way, initiatives are built to last.
But if I might challenge a little here, isn't there a risk that local politics and corruption might sabotage even these well-intended, locally led projects?
That's a fair point, and it's why any partnership must come with strong accountability measures. It's not enough to just hand over money or technical support. There needs to be transparent controls and community involvement. Otherwise, we're just
Right,
shifting the
exactly.
problem rather than solving it.
True. And then there's the role of the media. The global media often amplifies Liberia's story, but the intensity fades all too quickly once the headlines change.
Right. The media is like intermittent rainfall. African voices, for instance, need to keep the dialogue alive long after the global attention moves on. Local and
Yeah,
independent media networks must have the platform to tell the full story, keep pressure on, and connect the dots across borders.
and we can see that happening with projects like the West Africa Justice Reporting Project. When African-led media take charge, it shifts the narrative from victimhood to accountability, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's about owning the narrative so that Africa can tell its own story without having outsiders misinterpret cultural nuances, like how a grandmother's proverb might mask a trafficking transaction. Only someone within the culture will truly understand that. It's all about
Exactly.
context.
Now, turning to legislation, it's promising that Liberia has strong anti-trafficking laws on paper, but we know enforcement is the real challenge.
Yes, indeed. Laws like the Trafficking in Persons Act are crucial, but they're only as good as their implementation. Think about it. Underfunded courts, too few prosecutors, and no proper witness protection
Uh-huh.
programs. It's like having fantastic blueprints for a building, but no tools to build it.
Right, there's a huge disconnect between legislation and actual on-the-ground justice. And it really underscores the need for specialized trafficking courts and mobile courts for rural regions.
Exactly. Justice must be accessible. If the nearest courthouse is hours away, then cases just get lost in red
Yeah.
tape. And that just means traffickers continue to operate with impunity.
And then we have the economic aspect. The fact that trafficking routes often mirror legal trade corridors is eye-opening.
Right. Traffickers use the same highways and borders as legal trade. It's like, they're exploiting the cracks in the system. By tightening regulations and using data sharing across borders, we could cut off this significant artery of
Mm-mm.
exploitation. Imagine if ECOWAS could flag suspicious cargo in real time.
That could be a game changer, turning trade routes into protection routes. It's a radical yet necessary shift.
And speaking of shifts, imagine forming an African anti-trafficking alliance, similar in spirit to the African Union's peacekeeping forces. This continental task force could pool intelligence, resources, and legal
Exactly.
expertise. It would be like an African Interpol specifically for trafficking.
That's a compelling vision. But how do you see this alliance overcoming the existing bureaucratic hurdles that have hampered past initiatives?
Well, it starts by building trust and shared responsibility across borders. Each nation would contribute based on its capacity, ensuring that no single country is
Right.
overburdened. Plus, with proper oversight, these collaborative frameworks can keep corrupt practices in check.
That makes sense. Shift from charity-led efforts to accountability-driven partnerships. It's not just about handing out aid, but about integrating these efforts into national and regional priorities.
Exactly. It's a moral test as much as it's a developmental one. When leaders measure success solely by economic metrics, they miss the deeper poverty of compassion. That's why African
Mm-mm.
leaders need to lead with humanity.
And then there's the survivors. The case is harrowing, but those 14 rescued children are symbols of resilience. They embody both tragedy and hope.
Yes, think about it. From an 11-month-old infant to an 8-year-old schoolchild, every life lost would be an unbearable tragedy. Instead, empowering survivors through rehabilitation and involving them in advocacy can transform pain into power. It's about turning silence into a shout for change.
I love that imagery. Empowering survivors to be voices in policymaking opens up a new avenue for breaking the cycle of exploitation.
It does, and it signals a broader, holistic approach. Economic empowerment for women and youth, strong regional cooperation, and education as a tool for prevention, not just charity.
Yeah.
It's a call for a continental renaissance in how we treat our most vulnerable citizens.
I completely agree. And this is not just about legal frameworks or funding. It's the very fabric of leadership that needs to change. Leaders must prioritize protective measures over political point scoring.
Right. And speaking frankly, until African leadership treats trafficking as a legacy-defining issue rather than a fleeting headline, children will continue to be sacrificed on the altar of political
Uh-huh.
negligence. It's a hard truth, but one we need to confront head-on.
Exactly. And let me ask, what do you think are the key takeaways for African leaders from this case?
I'd say there are three shining lessons. First, leading with humanity means investing in social services and protections with the same passion as economic growth.
Right.
Second, empowering local protectors and communities, making sure they manage the initiatives, not just wealthy donors. And third, uniting across borders to form an alliance that stands as a fortress against trafficking.
That's a powerful trio of strategies. But I wonder, isn't it almost, well, a bit idealistic given the current state of governance in many places?
I get that. It does sound, optimistic. But idealism here is necessary. It's a blueprint for, a future where children are valued above all else. And sometimes, a vision is exactly what is needed to push for real change.
Very true. Ultimately, it all comes down to the moral choices we make today. Whether we, as a collective society, decide that every African child is worth everything.
Absolutely. This case, and the broader discussion surrounding it, serves as a stark reminder that silence sustains injustice while awareness can spark transformative change. Every stakeholder, from local communities to the diaspora, has a role to play. And it starts with us demanding accountability and compassion from our leaders.
Right. It's been an intense conversation, but one that matters deeply. Our hope is that these ideas ignite actions that protect the future of Africa's children.
Well said. And thanks for joining in this deep dive. Let's keep pushing for a future where no child is ever treated as a commodity and where every voice counts.
Absolutely.
Until next time, stay engaged and stay human. 5 women, 14 children, one continent forced to reckon with its conscience.
The fight against trafficking isn't about statistics. It's about survival, justice, and moral leadership.
To our African leaders, protect your people before poverty becomes a crime. To our viewers, awareness is the first act of resistance.
You've been watching The Bold African Voice. Subscribe, share, and join us as we expose the truths shaping Africa's destiny.